especially want to thank Mayor Sweet and the other city representatives who have made time to help us with this presentation and answer questions tonight. So I really appreciate their input on this, and so that's fantastic they're able to join us. So we are here tonight to provide an overview on the 85th Street plan, as well as outline key issues on the plan, and then give the neighbors an opportunity for questions and that can be answered by the city representatives. So I was wondering, Mayor Sweet, did the city have something to present?
We do, Susan. So with us tonight, I think, is Jeremy McMahon, and let me see, and Kurt Triplett, City Manager Triplett is here. And everybody. Yeah. Jeremy, who's got the slide deck?
Allison's got it. If Allison, are you logged in?
Yeah, I don't see Allison yet.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, yay. So Allison and Jeremy have been managing this work, Allison particularly. And so what we thought we would do is do, an 8-slide presentation to get it kicked off to kind of where we are. And then we can go back to your slides and talk about the concerns that you have and just listen to where the neighborhood is. Will that work for you?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay. And Allison, do you have the ability to share?
Looks like it.
I should say present now.
Yeah, if you're ready for me, I'll go ahead and pull up what I've got here.
Great.
Is that working for folks?
Yep.
Great. So as the mayor mentioned, I'm Allison Zyke. I'm a senior planner with the city. Been working on the Northeast 85th Street Station area plan. So we have a real quick overview. I think we want to focus on listening to you tonight rather than hearing ourselves. But if you're not familiar yet, the station area plan is looking at a plan for the area within approximately a half mile of the new BRT station that Sound Transit is planning, and that BRT, or Bus Rapid Transit station, is coming along with a redevelopment of the interchange at Northeast 85th Street and 405. So that's a joint project between Sound Transit and WashDOT. Wanted to just give you a quick overview of how we got here, or why we're doing a station area plan in the first place. And so this all started back in 2016 when the voters approved Sound Transit 3 that created the funding for Bus Rapid Transit on 405. So like I mentioned, Sound Transit and the Washington State Department of Transportation partnered to redevelop the interchange. The cities collaborated with Sound Transit and WashDOT to agree on some high-level design components. So that includes some of the access to that BRT station that's going to live within the interchange, and some other items like the pickup drop-off lot located in the northwest quadrant of the excess WashDOT right-of-way. So there's going to be a pickup drop-off lot up in the Highlands. And as far as when we expect to see that interchange actually redeveloped, I think I saw from Sue that was one of the questions you all had. So we're hearing from Sound Transit that they're still expecting right now, scheduled to begin service and have that interchange rebuilt by 2025. Now that is pending some realignment discussions that Sound Transit is at right now. And those realignment decisions are scheduled to happen in July of this year. Everything we've heard from Sound Transit to date says that the redevelopment of the interchange and BRT, it's not a matter of if, but of when it happens. So from the information we're getting from them, we don't anticipate the project to go away. It might get delayed a little bit, but right now we're planning on it happening by 2025. So with that, it's a huge investment for the region. We're looking at how we can plan best for the area around it. We already have goals in our comprehensive plan that we have adopted that support transit-oriented development and walkable neighborhoods. Some of our neighborhood plans already have or are looking at adding specific policies that support those elements and support the station area planning process. And with that, with the goals we already had supporting the process and the plan, City Council did authorize a budget for us to do a station area plan study. The planning department is leading the process. It's involving, I think, most other departments in the city at this point. It's a big project for us. And we are working with a consultant team. The lead consultant is a firm called Massoon out of Seattle. And I listed here, I won't read them off to you, but City Council has endorsed this project vision, values, and goals for the station area planning process. And we're really looking at the station area plan as an opportunity to do some great things in Kirkland, like expand housing options and affordability. Like I mentioned, leverage that regional investment and the access we have to high capacity transit. If it's coming to Kirkland, what do we do with it? But also to make that area more pedestrian and bike friendly. We're centering equity on our planning process. And then it's also an opportunity to implement, like I mentioned, comp plan goals we already have. And we're really looking at how we can improve the public realm in that area. So just a few things that we think are opportunities with this process. I will say there is not a plan yet for the station area. We're in the process of studying what to do there. So right now, we have a range of options that have been studied on the table. We do not have a plan yet. So we welcome any thoughts you have tonight to help us kind of move forward and figure out what folks want that plan to be. From a previous questions from another neighborhood group, we had some questions about kind of how the comprehensive plan fits into all of this. And so the current adopted comprehensive plan for the city is planned out to 2035. We do have to update our comprehensive plan every 8 years. That's a state law. We also update the comprehensive plan annually, and that could be to adopt updated neighborhood plans, to update the capital improvement program, maintenance items, things like that. And as I mentioned, more recent updates to the comprehensive plan have recognized that we are going to be doing the station area planning process. So the next comprehensive plan we're looking at is for a horizon year of 2044. We're going to be starting that work pretty soon. So the station area planning process that we're working on now is sort of designed to flow into that next comprehensive plan update that we're going to be starting work on soon. I just put these up here. These are some of those comprehensive plan goals and policies that we look at to help guide our station area planning process. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I put them up here for your reference in case you'd like these slides afterwards. It gives you kind of a starting point if you want to dig in and do some research. And so just a quick overview of sort of what the overarching process is for the station area plan. We had 4 major steps when we initially scoped this process, and we've completed one of them so far. So like I mentioned, there's not a plan yet. We're really still in the process. So we've completed the vision and concepts phase. That included setting those project objectives. It involved some outreach and some engagement with the community to really identify what people already like about Kirkland and what people vision for the future. And then in the next step that we're kind of still in right now, we issued a draft environmental impact statement that was issued back in January of this year. And that document really serves to set a bookends of options. So that gives us the range of options that we're analyzing. And it's really an environmental disclosure statement. So it's looking at several different components like transportation, land use, housing, greenhouse gas emissions, a lot of different elements that we're looking at to see what are the potential impacts to each of those elements under different growth scenarios. And we had a public comment period associated with that draft environmental impact statement being issued. We've talked to council a couple times. And one of the big things that we learned is that this is a really big project for Kirkland in terms of all the things we're looking at potentially happening. We don't have a plan for what's going to happen yet, but we're looking at a lot of options. And what we really heard resoundingly from the community and also from our city council was, hey, we need more information than we have right now before we start making decisions. And so that kind of led us to where we're at right now, which is really reassessing the scope of the project, looking at how we can answer some of the questions that we still have, and looking at what additional analysis might we need to do enable us to answer some of those questions and make informed decisions as we move forward. So we just talked to City Council last week, I think Tuesday, about a proposed scope for how we start filling in those blanks and getting some of that additional analysis to answer questions that council didn't feel we had enough information on yet. And so what that is going to look like as we move forward is really probably inserting a whole other step in the middle of the process here. That'll be a fiscal impacts analysis that's also going to look at community benefits and trade-offs as we look at different options for the project. And so as far as what that does to the schedule, initially we thought we were going to be able to look at adopting a station area plan in late spring, early summer of this year. And that just really wasn't enough time to do all the work that we need to do a good job. And so what we're looking at now with that additional step is that likely, and council did endorse kind of the draft proposal for the scope that we laid out for them last week. We're looking at that kind of fiscal impacts and community benefits analysis, probably taking the better part of the summer. And then we're inserting some more community input opportunities along the way as well. So just in broad terms, what we're looking at is probably towards the end of the year, having sort of a preferred plan direction. So a general sense of where we're headed with the plan, and being able to issue our final EIS, environmental impact statement. And that won't be the final plan. That's just the environmental document we have to do for the State Environmental Policy Act, but it'll be a more narrowed scope than where we're looking at now. So as we move through the year, our plan is kind of start moving the bookends in, and eliminating certain things from consideration. So looking to issue our final environmental impact statement by the end of this year, getting close to a preferred plan direction, and then really kind of hitting the streets, talking to the community a lot more when we have more specific things to talk about early next year. And we anticipate, under what we're thinking the schedule might be right now, probably looking at a final plan more in spring of next year, so about a year out from now. And that's all I prepared, just trying to kind of let you know broadly where we're at. Like I said, I've probably talked too long already. Just wanted to let you know that the next time we're kind of taking this plan out to the public is we are attending our Planning Commission meeting next week. So on the 22nd, that's a Thursday. And we're going to be providing them a briefing. It's going to be a lot of the same information, or I think all the same information we talked about with council last week. We're just going to catch Planning Commission up and give them a briefing on where we're at. So it'll be a more detailed version of what I've shared with you tonight. And that is all I had. So I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back over.
Great. Thanks, Allison, for that great overview of both the plan and the process. And now I'd like to pass it over to Ken McKenzie, who's going to, oh, sorry, I'm not presenting. Who's that now? Ken McKenzie, who is going to present on some of the key concerns we have.
Great. Thank you.
I'm doing this off of your screen, right?
There we go. It's coming up.
Okay. Okay, so could you back up one more? I think there's kind of an interesting picture there. Nope, one more. Yeah. So this was an early rendering of what the station might look like. What's underneath that oval sort of in the middle, I think, is 405. So let's go on to the next one.
Actually, Ken, I think above the oval is 405 and under is Northeast 85th. Is that right? You said below the oval is 405.
Yeah, okay. Then I stand corrected. Sure.
So this would be 405 here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. let's press on to stuff I'm more comfortable with.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so this is a simple map of the station area. And so you guys can see it's oriented 405 north-south and 85th east-west. So I think that follows on pretty well with Allison's. Okay, next slide. So one of the questions that's come up is that people are seeing more a desire on the part of the city to add more and more housing. And there's a lot of open questions and people keep asking, is there really a strong connection between adding a lot more housing and having more affordable housing and more equitable housing? What is the connection? How does it really work? In some places, we've had some comments from folks about how it looks like a market rate house, market rate apartment building right next door to an affordable housing building results in more expensive market rate housing. And it's unclear, but what I think would be really good for the neighborhoods is for the city to establish the connection that more housing means more affordable housing. So this is an open issue. Next slide. So digging into the draft EIS, this bar chart is constructed, and it shows kind of the two end options. The green is the no change, kind of roughly 6 to 8 stories along 85th and 405, kind of today's zoning. And the draft EIS predicts that if you do nothing to change the zoning, you end up adding 2,500 dwellings, and you end up adding about 6,000 residents by 2035, and you end up adding about 11,000 jobs. So there's substantial growth in the station area, even if you don't change the zoning. At the other end of the spectrum, for alternative 3, if you go with the 10 to 20 story alternative, you get almost 10,000 dwellings added. And the projection is about 24,000 new residents, which is roughly 25% to 27% addition to what we have today in Kirkland inside a 1 square mile area. So imagine the density of adding that many people in that small of a place in a place like Kirkland. And then the other number that comes from the draft EIS is 35,000 new jobs. And we presume that the office towers that are envisioned are the source of that. And there's a lot more jobs than there are new residents, which means there's a lot more commuter traffic into this area as people come and go to work. Furthermore, we're concerned about whether it's reasonable to assume that the people who are working in this area would in fact live in that area, because the folks who are working there, it seems from the city's direction, would most likely be working at places like Google. And they're going to be making $200,000 a year. And are they going to live in a 1-bedroom apartment in a tall apartment tower? So there's a lot of question and concern among the neighborhood when we look at this kind of graph and think about the density and think about the need for affordable housing and wondering how it all adds up. And we just can't see it right now. Next slide. So this was a schematic, kind of an aerial view rendering that was pulled out of the draft EIS. And it gives people who haven't had a chance to look at the EIS a picture of what this neighborhood is going to look like. So the gray area is the station area plan. It's about 1 mile square. And you can see this wall of tall buildings, presumably 20 stories tall, right along 405. Which is also at the top of a hill. So those buildings, those offices, and some number of apartments. I guess there'll be some Bellevue style luxury apartments there, are going to have a fabulous lake view. And behind them will be everybody else. So there's a wall there that's 20 stories tall. And some places in the draft EIS, it talks about that's a wonderful thing because it'll keep the air pollution from I-405 away from the residential areas. Other people see it as a developer's dream, where if you grab that land right along there, you get to have really high prices for both office spaces and apartments. And then the other thing you see from this schematic is the intrusion of this development on the surrounding neighborhoods. And in some cases, the neighborhoods are just flattened. They're just going to be torn down. There's residences that will be replaced by tall buildings. And in other places, somebody's going to be living in the shadow of a tall building. And even right around one of our favorite parks. So there's a lot of concern about the impact of this development on Kirkland. We think about 27% more people living in 1 square mile. What's that going to do to the character of Kirkland? A character that today, when you look at a want ad on for a Kirkland position working for the city, odds are you're going to see a description that says, it's really wonderful to work in a village. And then we look at this and we say, oh, the vision of Kirkland is not what Kirkland is today. Next slide. So there's a lot of talk around the neighborhoods about transportation and the impact of this development on transportation. We talked about how there's going to be a lot more jobs. There's going to be people that are trying to get to those jobs. How are they going to do it? How are they going to do it when they're living in a suburban area that doesn't necessarily have great transportation, public transportation? There's no park and ride around this station. And what are we going to do about the people that are traveling back and forth between Kirkland and Redmond, and the people that are traveling from 405 to Redmond today on 85th? And how is that traffic pattern going to be impacted by this development? We're concerned about how we get around in Kirkland if this sort of density is installed in this critical throughway between two fairly important East Side cities, between Kirkland and Redmond. And there's a lot of traffic on 85th. I faced the issue for about 5 years of getting kids to and from Kirkland and Grasslawn, or Kirkland and Marymore at rush hour. I had to pick up a kid at school, over to the soccer field, back to home to go to eat dinner, and then get them to some kind of after school, after dinner activity. 85th is critical. And I ended up doing cut-throughs in order to solve the problem. If this sort of development is dropped on top of 85th, it's going to make that transportation corridor a nightmare. Now, it's really good to have some more biking options, but we all know that 85th is limited in size. And we also look at the surrounding minor streets that parallel 85th, and we see that they just don't have much traffic carrying capability, and you can certainly get some bikes there. And we like the pedestrian walkways. That's really good. I mean, I certainly have walked on 85th underneath 405 and tried to negotiate the entrances and exits from 405 onto and off of 85th, and it's miserable. So any improvement there is really, really welcome. And I had a kid that rode his bike to Lake Washington High School, and he's really going to be grateful for some alternatives there. But that's just helping the current situation. That's not going to, as far as we can see it, and maybe we just need to be educated, but we don't see that as improving the overall situation, especially when you put 25% more Kirkland inside a very small section of Kirkland. Okay, next slide. And we looked at the school issue as outlined in the draft EIS. And we don't know where these student generation rates came from. The footnote that's in the draft EIS says that the data came from Kirkland and LWSD. they don't actually make a whole lot of sense, because as near as we can figure out, every elementary school kid eventually goes to high school. So if you add 542 kids into elementary school, eventually all those kids are going to end up in high school. And we know that today the schools are overcrowded. And we just went through an effort to add a lot of classroom space to our schools. And even so, for the first time, we now have portables at Kirkland Middle, and we have portables at Rose Hill Middle. And it looks like we may not have portables at Lake Washington High School. All the elementary schools, as far as I can figure out in this area, already have portables. We need a whole new elementary school to even do alternative 2. 542 new kids for the middle choice. And an elementary school in Kirkland means space for kids to go out and play. It means playground space. It means field space. That's how to solve this problem is not discussed in the plan in any meaningful way. And we know that there's discussions planned with the school district, but nothing in that schematic and the aerial view, that rendering, showed where there's going to be a new school campus. Next slide. Parks are critical to Kirkland's way of life. Parks means open space where people can relax. And yes, this does happen to be a middle of the day summer picture that I took, I think about 4 or 5 years ago in Crestwoods. But this is the way parks are used. And you could go all over and Kirkland and see this kind of thing. We're going to add 25% to 27% more people and no new parks that provide those people with the relaxation they need. If you look at Crestwood soccer fields, they're totally full. We're going to have a lot more kids that are going to want to play soccer. Where are they going to have organized Lake Washington Youth Soccer Association soccer? Where are they going to practice baseball? We need park space in order for Kirkland to be Kirkland. Can't see anything in the draft EIS. There's no allocation of substantial open space. And yes, one council member mentioned maybe we can take some of the Cloverleaf area now and turn it into a park. You're not going to have the kind of park that's pictured here and the kind of park that we treasure in Kirkland by putting it right next to I-405. Need to do better. Next slide. Sue, you want to take over the next steps, or you want me to talk about this?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we heard at the study session, and also Allison just talked about how there's first off, there's more money is going to be spent doing planning and for this project, and there's going to be more time. And the physical impact and community benefit studies that Allison talked about are really important, and there are scheduled some open houses. What we've discussed in Ken is we need a public hearing. We need a place for the people to actually talk to our elected representatives about what's on our mind. And we really appreciate Mayor Sweet being here. We need a public hearing where we can get all the issues out on the table, because we know that there's a lot of good intention, that the workshops have a tendency to go nowhere. That is, people submit comments, and people submitted comments for the draft EIS, and they're just going to get answered. We can't see how those comments actually result in real change. So we're looking for a way to have a conversation with decision makers and people who are going to respond to concerns that the community has. And it's really good that this is going to take some more time. What we also need is an opportunity to modify the proposal so that it fits more with what Kirkland is. And yes, we need more density. We need more affordable housing. We need a larger impact on, we need a larger dependency on transit. We also need to retain Kirkland. We come here and choose to live in Kirkland. We buy a house or rent an apartment because we like the schools, we like the parks, we like the environment. We want to live in Kirkland, and Kirkland needs to grow, and Kirkland needs to change and adapt. But Kirkland does not have to be bulldozed and Capitol Hill built in its place. We need to respect what we are and foster that in a way that allows Kirkland to adapt and not get destroyed. One council member said at a meeting that it was really a good idea that the city was looking at this station area plan because it would give the city an opportunity to build a real neighborhood along 85th Street. And I listened to that and I thought, there already is a neighborhood on 85th Street. I bet the people in Rose Hill think they've got a pretty cool neighborhood. So what's this talk about? We need to make a neighborhood. We have one. We need to enhance it. We don't need to level it. Thank you.
Great.
Great.
Thanks, Ken, for your review of the key issues. So now we'd like to have a question and comment session. And I'm wondering, Mayor, if it's possible for you and your team to take questions.
Oh, sure. Susan, if I could just talk to Ken's discussion first.
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
I mean, one of the reasons why we are doing this is because we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. Recognizing that we were going to have a sound transit, that bus rapid transit station, and then recognizing and the amazing work that Sound Transit and WashDOT and Kirkland put together in terms of designing a station that could actually be designed in a way that it was able to reach into the neighborhoods, that it was able to integrate things like bike trails and walking facilities. And the design is amazing. But it was at that point that we recognized we really had to look at the whole area around the plan, not just to support the station area itself, but to support, we didn't want to lose any opportunities. So when we started looking at this thing, we started looking at the draft EIS stuff, we went, whoa, that's why we're investing almost $500,000 in doing these assessments of what it is that we need to build there. So Ken, your words with all of these issues will be addressed as we work through this process. So I thank you for putting them out so intelligently and so clearly. The big blue building design on the freeway is a scary looking proposition. It is not where we are going to go. It is not where this council is going to let us go. So with that, I appreciate your presentation, all the thought and the time that you put into it, but we will address these issues. So Susan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor.
Tell people they can
Yeah,
raise
I
their hands
encourage people to raise their hands if they have a question.
with the little button at the
And I
bottom.
think Michael and Kathy have a question. Go ahead.
My name is Michael Radcliffe and Kathy Radcliffe. It's more of a statement than a question. I was on the planning commission for about 8 years in the late 80s and early 90s. And Kirkland was rated highly because of its personal space. It was smaller. But if you could bring up the slide that shows the half-mile circle and the area. Now, I'm concerned because on the planning commission, it lists 3 alternatives in this plan. I read the 74 pages. Based on my knowledge, one of those alternatives is going to go forward. And so alternative 1 does not change anything. Alternative 2, if you read the words, it says it'll go from 85 to 65 to 45 feet as it heads east along 405. I'm just going to talk about the east side of 405, not the west side. But if you look at the picture, 85 feet on the north side, but all of a sudden the Lee Johnson area is 150 foot height limitation marked on it. And based on when I was on the planning commission, Lee Johnson begged for more and more space converting single family dwelling to cars and only car storage. Well, now that's marked at 150 feet right next to single family residences. If you go east on 405, even though the words say 85, 65, and 45, you have marked all the way along east along 85th is marked at 85 feet, and directly behind those houses, that area is single family resident at 30-foot height. To have an 80-foot building, 85-foot building next to a 30-foot building, and then it'll kill that neighborhood. And so what I see now, RH3, when you first flashed through one of your screens, Alice and Zeke did, it showed single family residence RH3. There's no single family residence RH3. It's all developments where the Petco and all those folks are. And that's listed right now at 85 feet. Right now, it can go from 45 to 75 feet. So 85 feet is not much of an increment. It's down below the hill. But I see, and then our alternate 3 goes up to 20 stories. Alternate 3, I think, is inconceivable. But I'm worried about inconsistencies, and you have 3 alternatives listed, and based on my knowledge in the past, one of those 3 alternatives is going to go forward. And changing that is going to be difficult, but it can be changed. And I see an alternative too. I see all these inconsistencies. What's in the wording and what's on the map, and that needs to be looked at, and it needs to be looked at closely, or you're going to end up with a 150-foot building next to a single-family residence. The way it's looked right now, that's unacceptable, and for those neighbors. Right now, I know along Market Street, when they had a hearing on the guy with the big sequoia tree, since you had commercial next to, it was zoned commercial next to single resident, he had to have a step down, and he couldn't really go over 25 feet for one lot, so you had to move back. I don't see that in this plan at all, the step downs. So I'm concerned it's already listed as 1, 2, and 3, and will it come out of there? Just go for it. That's our concerns. And you'll have huge buildings sticking up right next to single family residences. Thank you.
What I can tell you, Michael, is that not 1, not 2, or 3 is going to go through as is. What the planning process it allows us to do is to operate within that window, the window of no change to pretty extreme change, and that's what we're evaluating. And I hear you. I hear what you're saying. No, you're absolutely right. We have to have step downs. We have to have transition zones, and all of that is stuff that we will look at.
I'd like to mimic Ken on, we need to have in-person get together. I have tried to, and I don't want to blame the building department, I've tried to call the guy that, works on developments in our neighborhood and get him on the phone. Impossible. So the only way I found in the past to talk to people about developments is face to face. And right now, you wear a mask, I think it's fine. So anyway, that's what I got to say. And
okay, we are getting closer. We probably are not going to open up City Hall until after July. But one of the things that I texted Kurt as we're talking, or as we're listening to you, is, yeah, I agree with you. We need to pull the city together sooner, and I'm not sure when and how we can do it. But my potential proposal to Kurt is, we have an annual event. Kurt, are you on here? Can you remind me when the City Hall for All is?
Yeah, City Hall for All is usually between September and October. So we've had slightly different dates depending on where, but it would be shortly after school gets back in session.
And generally that's a day where we simply open up City Hall, and we've incorporated big meetings like this. This is where we kicked off the original sustainability master plan. So that's something we can think about, but I agree with you. I believe we do need to look at something like a town hall.
All right. Would anybody else like to ask more questions? Raise your hand. Roshan?
Hello,
Thank you,
I'm
Sue.
Jill. Oh, go ahead. Who's
Hi,
next?
Roshan.
Hi. Hi, Penny. Thank you so much for coming to this meeting and hearing the comments. And I attended virtually the study session that the City Council had last week. And, I thought there was just really a lot of thoughtful discussion, and city staff did a great job. And, our consultants are very comprehensive on so much of the study. I will say that I really have to say that, the comments that Ken made were some of the things I was really feeling as well. Like, what are the essential things about Kirkland that that our stewardship model says must be preserved to make our city be sustainable and to be the attractive place that it's been for me for over 50 years. And so I do have one question for you, which is one of the things I heard in the study session was that it's not all either option 1 or option 3, that the consultants in particular were pretty forceful about you can take options from 3. And so, when I heard Michael and Kathy, make their remarks, I thought, well, this really brings to mind that, it's hard to take, and I thought it was option 3 had up to maybe almost 28-story buildings. Maybe I'm off on my math to it, but even if it's 20 something, if you group them in a certain area and said, okay, we're taking this part from option 3 and we're going to take this part from option 1, and you mix it all up, it's really going to be, that's a more complex discussion for the community to have as well. And so I just wanted to hear what you or what Kurt or Allison have to say about, is there a mix and match possibility? So that's kind of question number 1. Question number 2 is, all the levels of service that we're accustomed to, whether it's from public safety or parks or schools, that really needs to be just, stress tested and analyzed for each of these scenarios before we do anything else. And the fiscal impact is the last thing I hope perhaps you might address, which is, I'm under the impression that city budget is very sensitive to, sales tax changes in particular. And we've been heavily dependent on car dealerships in the past. And if we have less of those kind of businesses and much more office space and kind of low-end retail, what will be the impact on our fiscal sustainability? So I'm sorry to ask so many questions at once, but I wanted to take my chance. So thank you again for attending and for your thoughtful responses to you, Penny, as well as to the staff. And I'll go on mute and listen now, and I'll lower my hand as well.
And I'm going to ask Kurt to talk a little bit about the fiscal policies and the response to, and then maybe Jeremy, you can take the mix and match question.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for having us. Fabulous questions, really important questions. So just very high overview. One of the things that city always grapples with is how much revenue is generated by what activities, right? I think Glenn Peterson might be on here. He used to say, if I was just going to zone for the maximum revenue, what would I do? And we said, well, your whole town would be a car dealership, right? So, so that's not anyone's goal. So one of the things that we're looking at this stationary plan for is today, this kind of height that currently exists, the economics will pick housing. And housing, from just a revenue generation standpoint that pays for police and fire and other things, is generally doesn't pay for itself. It's generally subsidized by the business side. So if we just stayed completely hands off, whatever the Johnson family decided to sell, it could be anything, but what would likely happen is someone would build a lot of multifamily housing there, because that's where the current market makes a lot of money for developers, right? So part of all this is to figure out, how do you actually replace a car dealership with great sales tax with something that generates similar kinds of revenue, but also brings the kinds of high-paying jobs that you want in the city, so that the people who take those jobs invest in schools and invest in parks and visit our retail and shop in restaurants and those sorts of things, right? So if you can get Class A office space and you can fill those spaces, you can approximate the same kind of revenue that a car dealership will generate, but it's more stable because it's through business license fees and other things like that. So, but in the end, it's a market choice. We don't get to necessarily pick who goes there. But in the two options that you're looking at, you could have a as good or better revenue generation if it was office space there than the car dealership. But if it was all housing, you would have less revenue for city services. There's other trade-offs like housing options, but so that's one of the issues we're looking at. And the final thing I'll say, and I'm happy to answer further questions, is the impact of any of these options on services is exactly what the council is pausing to look at. So that was the question they asked is, well, would this drive a need for more fire service? Would it need a new fire station? Would we have to hire more police officers? Where would we develop and put park space? And would any of these options generate the revenue necessary for the city to support those services? The EIS, as you know, raises the questions, it doesn't answer them, right? So it sort of highlights the impacts, but doesn't provide the solution. So what we're trying to do with this next iteration is to actually do that analysis to get the city council those answers, to say, will this generate additional revenue or will it cost you more than it's worth? And I think the last piece of that is the impact on schools. That was something I heard from all 7 council members is this has to help make school situation better, not worse, right? So it's got to be something that doesn't overwhelm the elementary schools, doesn't overwhelm the high schools. So the school district has to be a huge part of this.
Hey, Roshan, I'll just add as Jeremy, regarding your discussion about the EIS and the 3 alternatives out there, is we led this process with SEPA, which is Kurt and Allison have described it as kind of a brutal look at, you pick a range of options to study, including what happens if you do nothing, what happens if you test some higher intensity alternatives. So we've tested 2, and we've tried to push the high bookends to like what would be the maximum tolerance there, and then if you take that maximum tolerance, which is 20 stories next to 405, can you mitigate that those impacts associated with it? So what the EIS has done at this point is a great job of disclosing all these impacts that come from that intensity of growth. I think what we don't know yet, and what the EIS doesn't do, is say that yes, we can mitigate that, right? So the next step with the fiscal impact study and the community benefits analysis is really to look at based on what alternative we think is appropriate, or what range of alternatives, we narrow the bookends as Allison talked about. Can we mitigate for that range of impacts? Like if 22 stories is too much in terms of aesthetic impacts, transportation impacts, etc., and you bring that down to something less. And so what we want to do over the next few months is narrow those bookends. And then, as you suggest, it really is this a la carte menu of, we want to talk about all the benefits that could come from these growth alternatives. We want to talk about all the impacts that could come from it. And then help the community and the council through a really deliberate exercise of how do you want to pick off that menu? Like what are the I keep hearing them called goodies, so excuse me, but what are the goodies you want in terms, like, if you could find a way to fund parks, you could find a way to fund schools out of this, is the level of growth that might generate those revenues acceptable, or is it generating too much traffic? So as you talked about, it's really a complex, multi-part variable analysis, but that's where we're headed over the next 6 months or so.
I think I saw Liz.
Yes, Liz has a question.
Yes, and I'd actually I know that Jill was starting to jump in before. So Jill, would you like to ask your question or comment?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much, Mayor Sweet, for being here tonight, and the other city people for helping. My question is more of a concern of concept and vision. I've heard all these beautiful discussions tonight, and I haven't been able to study it. If I live down near Waverly Beach Park, and I have my children, and I have to take them to Lake Washington High School to school, I'm going to have to, with these plans, drive through a business community to get them up to the high school. Some of the kids walk down to 85th to just take the bus or walk home. What I'm seeing in Kirkland is it's becoming generic looking. We're starting to look like other cities, Ballard, parts of Seattle. And I feel that we're starting to lose the integrity of what the city of Kirkland has been. When I look at trying to go to up 85th and like past Kirkland Urban, I don't see a family-oriented community in that spot. We have 2 downtown elementary schools, and I'd like to know are these families who are going to get more children in these schools managed through that place up on Rhodes Hill? it seemed, I want to know whose purpose is that community going to be with these large buildings taking up airspace? We're losing the gateway to downtown Kirkland is going to be these large, massive structures. And so I feel like we're losing what our city has been without thinking about where the future is going to be. So that's what are the goals? That's it.
Thanks, Jill.
Liz?
Sure, thank you. And again, thanks everyone for being here. I have just a little detailed question about the bookends. This is something that has come up in this sort of reassessment of, now we have this fairly broad range of alternatives from do nothing to, alternative 3, which is quite a significant change. So what I've heard at the study session at council, for example, is there's an effort to narrow that broad range so that we can do this analysis of the fiscal scenario, the benefit scenario, et cetera. Because you try to analyze the options and trade-offs and fiscal impact across the entire scale. We'll be here for 20 years doing that. So I think there is some real value in narrowing that scope to provide what I've heard called these bookends, and that will bookend and define a smaller range for which these more detailed studies would be done. If that's correct, is there some criteria yet for what will be used to define those bookends? Is it height? Is it density? Is it housing? I don't know. What are the criteria for defining those bookends, and where does the input come from to define them?
I'm going to take a stab at that just a little bit. I think Allison put up the goals and the vision that we have for this potential opportunity. I'm going to call it that. As we have these discussions, and I'm certainly having them with more than your neighborhood. When I'm down at the shop, that's a whole lot of what folks want to talk about when they come in. And there's all kinds of opinions out there. But the bottom line is we don't want to just have a bus stop at 85th because we don't have the infrastructure around it to make it work. So if it's going to be a bus rapid transit station, we have to have infrastructure around it to support that. And this is our opportunity to look at, whether you call it a bookend or not, it's to look at the kinds of resources that we can bring to bear to address those needs. And if on the way, it gives us an opportunity to think about things like additional green space, more school space, more, walkability, pedestrian ability, although the plan itself already addresses a lot of that. That's why we're looking at this. We are looking at this as an opportunity. And the other element of it is potentially some level of housing affordability. If you've paid any attention to this council, you are aware that that is a high priority for this council, is to make sure that we can have housing that is affordable to our workforce, for our nurses and our police officers and our firemen. We don't have that kind of housing available now. And we don't know, because we can't force what people build, but what we can try and do is to identify ways to support people building that kind of housing in our communities. So those are just some of the overarching things that we think about. But that's what I would refer you to, Liz, is to go back to that vision statement. And I'm sure Allison will make that slide deck available through Susan.
Okay, yes, thank you. I agree we want to leverage what's happening at the bus rapid transit station. I would follow up though, from your description, I'm still struggling a little bit to understand what criteria are being used to define a bookend and what kind of inputs being used to choose a bookend. And maybe that's not solidified yet. So, I mean, that's certainly possible.
Jeremy, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. I don't think we've fully fleshed it out yet. Right now, what we want to do as a first step is rerun the traffic modeling to get a better sense of the transportation impacts. But I think in general, what we'll look at is the criteria, all the impact areas that are identified in EIS. So it's things like the aesthetic impacts and transitions. It's the land use changes. It's the transportation impacts, the intersection impacts, bus access. So I think it really is, I think the criteria will be around those impacts and what kind of tolerance do you have, or what kind of growth scenario can you support within those impact areas, or do we want to look at? And I will say, I think we want to leave that, I think the high bookend, we want to leave high. Like not that even that high bookend is going to be what the city council ultimately picks, but we do want to stress test. We want to continue to stress test the high bookend against the low bookend. So we'll bring it down, but that I just want to let folks know that whatever that high bookend is that we test, it's still going to be the a la carte menu, and that's still not necessarily an option that we would expect council to pick. But it just lets us do a more detailed evaluation around it. But I do think that the criteria are going to be around the impact areas that are identified in the environmental impact statement.
Well, if I could add, Liz, and certainly public feedback is one of the key criteria, right? So the council, I think, part of the reason they did the first pause and asked us to come back with the cost benefit analysis was because of public feedback, right? And so that's going to be a key piece of it as well. So we're looking at all of those things, but the analysis has to be kind of iterative. You have to sort of say, we're going to posit this. What would happen if you had this? What would that mean? Is it something that we still think makes the community something we want it to be? If not, let's ratchet it down. So it's going to be the way the analysis is going to work. It's going to be very iterative, and it's going to definitely include the public feedback as a key piece of that.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you very much for all those answers. Can I sneak in one more question, Sue? Oh, she's muted. I'm going to assume that's a yes. Transportation. I'm glad you brought that up. I am interested in getting more information, and it doesn't have to be right this second, but I've been looking at the bus station, the new bus rapid transit, and thinking about how I would use that as a resident, and because I love using mass transit. I loved our 255. And it doesn't go downtown anymore. We're going to have to change at UW, and that's a little annoying, but it's been COVID, so I haven't ridden the 255 lately. So we'll figure out how that all works. But I'm a huge fan of mass transit, and I'm trying to figure out how I would use the transit. So I would encourage you to give us some more information along those lines to help us get excited about it, because I look at the BRT, for example, and I see that it goes from Linwood down to Tukwila, I think, and that probably doesn't do a lot for me, but I would ride it to the airport in a minute if it would work. So how do I do that? Well, I have to get to the BRT. Maybe someone drops me off at the Kiss and Ride because there's no parking, but we could work that out. I love the idea of the little autonomous shuttles up and down the west side of 85th and the west side of 405 on 85th. So there's lots of options there, but I need to get to the BRT. And then when I get on the BRT, I can ride that down. I don't think I have to change in Bellevue. It does pull off the highway and go to the Bellevue station, but I can stay on the bus. And I can get down, not to the airport, I can get to, I think, Tukwila. And then I would need to get off of the bus, and hopefully they build some kind of a nice overpass across those roads there so I can get over to the light rail station and then take the light rail to the airport. So I think that's how that works. But I could get a lot more excited about this if I could see what this transit's going to do for me. I've heard that the Rapid K line that would go east-west across 85th has been delayed, maybe. So that's unfortunate because that would help out. I know that, we don't have light rail in Kirkland for quite a while. And when we do, it's down at the South Kirkland Park and Ride, I believe. So I'm just trying to see our transit picture and how it's fabulous for Kirkland. And that would help me get more excited.
And I agree with you 100%, Liz. I'm going to give it to you, Kurt, just a second. But one of the things that we have, that we're being, I don't know, I'm a Pollyanna, so I'm a glass half full person. And I look at things like the American Recovery dollars that are coming our way, and I think, why wouldn't you use them for bus infrastructure? Why wouldn't you, pour a bunch of money into Metro, pour a bunch of money into Sound Transit? So one of the things that drives us a little bit is not even knowing how all of that's going to land. But I think that it's going to be in transportation infrastructure that's going to have to get a big blast from the American Recovery monies. Go ahead, Kurt.
I'll just keep it really short because there are a lot of questions about the stationary plan, but the city for the last 5 years has made a really aggressive push into transit. And we are really on the cusp of some stuff that was pretty miraculous before COVID hit. So the K line that you mentioned, the bus rapid transit line, the Kirkland City Council members and staff really pushed to get that put on the list and funded. So that was going to be a rapid line that went from Totem Lake through downtown to the Totem Lake Park or the South Kirkland Park and Ride. We pushed for some substantial increases in the 255. All of that stuff was teed up for the February and March service change of 2020, and then COVID happened. So what we're now also doing on the other end is putting just as much advocacy into restoration. So folks like John Pascal and Neil Black and Deputy Mayor Arnold are pushing on all those levels. So there's a lot of really fantastic transit beyond the BRT in the system that is already there. We just have to make sure it comes back. And so I think when you see it all and we actually get it restored, it's going to be pretty fabulous. One other option for the BRT to the airport is actually if you get off in Bellevue, you can catch the new Bellevue light rail will exist, the East Link, and you can take that over and down to the airport as well. So there'll be multiple options to connect. That will also let you go into Redmond or into Seattle. So that spine of the BRT is going to be really important to connect the whole east side to the existing light rail lines as well. So, but yeah, we put a lot of work around making sure that transit was a key piece of this local transit, not just this regional transit. And we're going to keep pushing at that at every level to get it restored.
Thanks.
Melissa, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I was wondering, this is a significant change, obviously, particularly if you go to the high book end. I've been noticing as I drive around Seattle that we have significant changes in other places. If you drive down 65th, just east of I-5, for instance, it's just one big, huge, gigantic box next to another huge, gigantic box. I mean, you can't see the high school anymore. You can't see those delightful old buildings. The character of that neighborhood is destroyed. And that's true of Ballard and other places in Puget Sound. Going into Edmonds, contrarily, they've maintained the character of their downtown, and it's still charming. I still take my out-of-town guests to Edmonds because it's one of the most inviting, charming places left in the Puget Sound. So Kirkland, to some extent, still retains some of that charm. If we start putting these kinds of buildings looming over the downtown area, I'm afraid that we will change the character of Kirkland. Ken brought this up in his comments as well. I'm wondering if there's any possibility that we can establish some sort of an aesthetic control to try to maintain the character that we enjoy in Kirkland, that we all moved here for, while we make this planning process. I know in the past there have been some conciliations, reconciling things about aesthetics, like putting in balconies and not having one solid facade, but having multiple facades on a building, etc. But so I know that there's some concern about that, or at least has been historically. Is there any possibility, I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but is there any possibility at all that we can establish, if we're talking about making this plan, and we're talking about doing this huge change, that we can consider some sort of an aesthetic board that would, number one, try to figure out how to transition it from these tall buildings into the neighborhood so that it isn't such a huge shock, and number two, make it welcoming and inviting, make it something that we came here for in the first place. Anyway, that's my question. I just feel so alienated sometimes when I look around at seeing the way things are going and feeling like developers just get to decide what Kirkland's going to look like, even though never mind. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Thanks, Melissa. I don't know that we have made a decision about design review. We have a design review board. Design Review Board oversees, I think, all development downtown, and we've extended it to other areas. I'm not sure, did we use it at Totem Lake?
Yes.
We did.
And it would happen. There's already design review in place in most of this area for larger projects.
Great.
So I think the design review board would inevitably oversee permitting and what the buildings in this area would look like, regardless of which option, even at alternative one. I think what's key for us, and that's part of one of the next steps, is to develop the guidelines and codes that would steer them. So the DRB, it's not just a carte blanche, do you like it or don't you like it, but we try to develop design guidelines that reflect the character you're talking about. We'd have to write design guidelines, we'd have to write form-based code. I won't go into what a form-based code is tonight, but it is trying to make it very specific and tailor it to the neighborhood and deal with all those transitions, etc. So that is on our work program.
Oh, I didn't see it on there, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Do we have any more questions or comments from the neighborhood? Roshan again?
Thank you, Sue. Mayor Sweet and city staff, and I extend this to all council members as well. I didn't want to let this opportunity go by without thanking you for your diligence and perseverance throughout this last year of so many things that have been going on. So I just wanted to note that and give you my heartfelt appreciation for your service and sensitivity. So, and I know it's hard to come out at these meetings at night after you've had long days too. So thank you for that. I do have just a couple other things for you. One thing is a comment in the EIS. I noticed that under option 3, the pollution measure is many multiples of what option 1 is. And even though the per capita rate falls, so there's some economy of scale in it, the overall, it's much, much bigger. So I just wanted to note that we have lots of stewardship goals on the environment. It's hard for me to see without some significant change in technology, how there's a big conflict that'll have to be reconciled. That's all I'm going to say about that. The other point was about, especially if it's option 3 or even option 2 with some components of option 3 in it, and especially if it's more oriented towards, the jobs we like, high-tech, well-paying jobs that have lots of good potential spillover effects. Well, one of the negative spillovers is, as you pointed out, Penny, is the housing prices are through the roof. I mean, I can't see a way that we would build enough in small compact areas to have a material impact on that. And this gets to my point, is how we define affordability. It's usually median income to median price, and trying to make the economics of that work when the base of it is so expensive is almost like a fool's errand. If you want to do it, you have to pick a spot somewhere. It doesn't have to be in Kirkland even. We need a regional approach to that to figure out where we're going to build things. And maybe we have to have some heavy component of public spending to maintain, to house the workforce that you're talking about, Penny. And those are the key people who, everyone's key in some sense, but when you think about, the teachers, the firefighters, the policemen, the nurses, etc., the ones who are mostly stressed, who we need to retain in our community, I think we have to think about it a little more expansively. And so that leads to the third point, which is, where are the other areas of potential development that could be taking on the kind of housing stock that we need? And is there in any of the planning models some way to figure out, to maintain a certain standard, aesthetic as well as economic and level of service? What's the upper limit for us? It's not infinite. And I've been to plenty of places around the world that are extremely dense, that have really great services. They're not what we have here. Okay, I still prefer this by far. And I've been to many other places that are very dense and they're very poor, and it's horrible. It's just horrible. So I'm trying to find something that is in line with kind of what Jill and Melissa and Liz and Ken have all talked about. So anyway, I'm sorry for kind of a long-winded comment and slight question at the end. The question is, where are the other areas that we could build in? And it doesn't necessarily have to be Kirkland by itself. Woodinville, Redmond, Bellevue, Issaquah. We have to have, and really the key thing is how to link those areas with good transportation. That's the other key component to it. So with that, I'll lower my hand and turn it back to you.
Thank you. I'm going to just throw out some of the work that we have been doing over the last couple of years with our legislative group. Transit-oriented development is an opportunity that sort of awaits anybody willing to figure out a way to do it. Sound Transit has, and Kurt, please feel free to jump in. I'm not as good at all the particulars about this one. I just have testified on it enough times that we had been working with WashDOT, the state of Washington, Department of Transportation, and Sound Transit around a potential garage that will be built at the Kingsgate Park and Ride. I think that land is state land. We are working on negotiating with the state the ability to transition it not just to parking, but to a lot of parking for the park and ride, but many units of affordable housing. We're looking for partners to help us with this. We're looking for the state to help us with this. We're looking for the state to look toward legislation that could ultimately do things like free up the cloverleaf lands that are going to be freed up with the transition to the transit center, or to the, you know what I mean, the BRT center, as a potential second steps to things that we are exploring with them in Kingsgate. And we're looking for partners to help us with this work. The state is hearing us. It's a very interesting battle, but those are some areas where we have opportunities. And Kurt, I need you to now fill in the huge ugly blank I left there. You're on mute. Kurt, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think you did a fabulous job explaining the Kingsgate Park and Ride site. You know, the reality is the stationary plan, you know, obviously given the potential density of it, is really the place we're focused, but other places where you may see development over time would still be Totem Lake, our urban center, and really the wing that swings out to the west. So you think about as you go past where Kirkland's building our new Totem Lake Park, and you go down 124th towards Redmond, you know, that's probably when you see things like the stationary plan happening and reaching capacity, that's probably the next place you'll see development. Kirkland's strategy for, you know, decades has really been to keep focusing density both in jobs and housing into these urban centers served by transit. So I think that's one of the things that does set us apart and does retain the Kirkland character, as we don't rezone the single family neighborhoods. Sorry, hold on. Too many phones going on at the same time. We're really trying to focus the growth to place that can be served by transit, so that we can have that mixed use of retail and housing, and keep the single family neighborhoods with their same character. The one change to that, of course, is the missing middle housing, where we're trying to create more opportunities for things like cottages and duplexes and accessory dwelling units, which help people stay in place and have their kids return from college, or have seniors live there. So there's a whole variety of things that we're looking at, but really the density areas are going to be really Totem Lake and the stationary plan.
And Kurt, if I could just add a little bit, a lot of folks don't realize that we have what we call inclusionary zoning in Kirkland right now. So most projects in Kirkland, if they have more than 4 multifamily units, have to include 10% of their housing. They have to build 10% affordable housing. It is based on median income, which, as Roshan notes, is kind of chasing after something where you have an area where income keeps growing so fast. So it is a real challenge. The opportunity that Penny mentioned for Kingsgate is, as part of rezoning that area, we're requiring that any TOD development there have 50% affordable housing. So that's where you need those regional partners and more money to come in to that, more funding opportunities to fund that housing. So 50% affordable housing, but also getting to lower income levels. So that's really kind of a cool opportunity with a lot of partners coming to the table to take a little bite out of it. And so station area plan, one of the things we want to look at is building on that. So could we think about any zoning increases, any density increases that it's incentive based. So if you have a base of 10% affordable housing, if you developed under alternative 1 right now, what would, to get additional height, could you build an incentive for more affordability into it? So that's one of the things we'll look at. In addition to looking at, we want to study what's called linkage fees, which City of Seattle and other communities have started to do, which is to try to tie the employment growth and the housing problems that come with employment growth of creating more demand for housing, to try to tie that into funding for solutions for housing. So working on it with a lot of different fronts, and some other night we can talk about a regional coalition for housing and our regional partners on that, but it's a challenge.
Well, we have a wonderful panel of experts here. So anyone who has a question or comment, I really encourage you to raise your hand. We give it one more minute here. Here we go, Nicole.
Thank you,
Oh, is it
Sue.
Ken? Oh,
Yeah, it's Nicole. Thank you. So I understand that Google is interested in expanding and maybe looking at some of this area on 85th Street. How much is Google pressing the city and influencing the city's thoughts on what may or may not happen in that corridor?
Well, I would lead with, Nicole, we have a long-term relationship with Google. We have worked with them very successfully to build amenities for the city. They have invested at least $3 million so far in the parks along the Cross Kirkland corridor, and they are just starting the development of a whole additional area along the corridor where they expand the park all the way through their new site. They have established themselves, in my mind, as fabulous partners for the city. They have always been amenable towards. I would say that their intention is always to leave a place better off than they left it. I have no concerns that we will have difficulty if Google does decide to build at that site with what they would build.
If I can add a little bit as well. So I think it's important to remember that Google has announced very publicly that they're considering the purchase of that site, but that's relatively recent. The idea of the station area plan was conceived and launched, several years ago after the Sound Transit passed, well before that idea came up. And I think to build on what the mayor is saying, I think we as a city, it's an interesting opportunity that Google's interested, because Google's not the sort of company, at least in Kirkland, that is demanding big things or high things. They want to fit in with the city. They want to be a partner with the city. They love Kirkland. That's why they want to be here, and that's why they want to expand here. So, if you were to contrast that with, if there was a potential other technology company, which is the other likely group of people who would look at stuff like this, is they might want something different, right? And they might be putting a lot of kind of pressure on it. So we're definitely aware of it and paying attention to and working with them, but it's also the station area plan itself and the density and the benefits are things that we would be doing whether or not Google was interested. So that's, I think it's a nice potential partner to work with as we go further.
Thank you.
Jill, did I see you have another question? You're on mute.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I would like to ask a more general question about the vision of Kirkland. I'm hearing about affordable housing, density, all those kinds of things. What I hear from my neighbors and other people I speak to in Kirkland I've been here since 1982. We're concerned about what is Kirkland becoming. And I wish if you could just address what the flavor is going to be versus what we have had. We loved Kirkland. That's why so many people moved here. We moved into little houses. We didn't care about having big houses. We wanted to be in Kirkland. So my question is, what is the character and the vision that the city is wanting to take us, and how are you going to maintain the character that we have had and still go forward and be progressive?
I think the clearest way that I can express that to you, and I can't do it off the top of my head, is we just recently went through our goals, our planning process for the next 2 years. We reevaluated our goals. We did layer some pretty heavy duty equity elements to it. But I would advise you to look at that, Jill, because that really is what guides us. And, Kurt, I know you're at your office. Do you have that available to send to Susan?
I can try to find it. I don't know if we have the updated version ready for email, but I'll see if I can. I'll post it if I do.
Thank you.
Dorothy?
And with that, Susan, are we just about done? Because my hungry husband is standing behind me.
Let's wrap up with one question or comment from Dorothy.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment, and that's one, thanks for taking the time to meet with us. And also, I understand that I've only been here since 97, so not forever. However, I went to Bothell High School and grew up in Woodinville, so I know what Kirkland was like. My grandparents lived here, what Kirkland was like 40 years ago. And I get that change is difficult, and I appreciate the amount of time and effort you're taking to help us understand what Kirkland is, what we're going to become. And I think that, yeah, it's difficult and yeah, it's different, but I support your effort to help us change. And that's it.
Thank you so much.
Mayor Sweet, did you want to say anything in closing?
No, I think you guys have done a good job of laying out what your concerns are. I think we've done a reasonable job of letting you know that we're hearing you, that we're not hearing just from you. And stay tuned. We will work on some kind of a town hall. And I think that's it. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for recognizing we really are working hard on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mayor and other representatives from the city. And I want to also thank the neighbors for participating and continuing to participate on this issue. And we'll be in touch.
Thanks much.
Okay.
Good evening.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.